My name is David Fathi. I'm the director of the ACLU's National Prison Project in Washington, D.C. Mental illness is extremely common in prisons and jails for a number of reasons. A landmark study by the U.S. Department of Justice found that more than half of people in prisons and nearly 2/3 of those in jails have some kind of mental health problem, many of them very, very serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders like major depression, bipolar disorder, very serious mental illnesses indeed. So this is absolutely endemic in incarcerated populations. Prison is probably the worst place you could possibly be as a person with mental illness because, number one, the availability of meaningful treatment is often virtually non-existent. And secondly, the chaotic, often violent, and certainly always stressful environment in prisons and jails is extremely counter-therapeutic. Many people with mental illness, they can do all right if they're getting treatment and if they're in an environment, a supportive environment, where they have some control over their day-to-day lives. But prison is, as I say, an enormously stressful environment and just about the worst possible place for someone with mental illness. Well, having done these cases for more than 25 years and having been into more prisons and jails than I can count, I'm sorry to say that it's overwhelmingly true that mental health care is either abysmally poor or virtually non-existent. And sometimes the incarcerated person with mental illness isn't even getting the medication that they would receive on the outside. They're not seeing a psychiatrist with the frequency that they should, or sometimes at all. To the extent that they're getting any talk therapy, it's being provided by someone who is not qualified to provide talk therapy. So again, it's in my experience, I'm sorry to say, it's deficient across the board, and it's very rare that people with mental illness in prison receive even minimally adequate mental health care. It is absolutely universally accepted that solitary confinement is toxic for people with mental illness, to the point where a number of courts have issued blanket rulings. You simply cannot put someone with a serious mental illness in solitary confinement. It's too dangerous to them, it's too harmful to them. Unfortunately, because of the kind of decompensation that you mention and the disturbing behaviors that some people with mental illness engage in when they're not getting treatment, they are very likely, much more likely than other prisoners, to end up in solitary confinement, where they tend to deteriorate catastrophically. We often see self-harm and even suicide. I had one case in Indiana where a man in solitary confinement choked himself to death with a washcloth. Another man set himself on fire in his cell. Just the most extreme and horrific self-harm behavior imaginable. But that's a predictable outcome of putting people with mental illness in solitary confinement. Well, there's a number of answers to that question. One is that something like 97% of incarcerated people are eventually coming home, and they're going to live next door to you and to me. And do we want people who have received treatment in prison, who have maybe had some job training, education, gotten their GEDs, maybe come out better and able to be a good neighbor and be a responsible citizen? Or do we want people who have been so broken by brutal conditions, by the denial of treatment for their medical and mental health problems, that they're not able to function in society when they get out, as virtually all of them will? But I think the more fundamental answer is that these are human beings, and even if they broke the law, even if they did something very bad and very serious, they're still part of the human family, and they're still entitled to conditions of baseline health and safety and human dignity. And that's what our work is all about. Well, I think the most important single thing is to cut the numbers. We lock up far more people than than any country in the world, but many, many times more than our peer nations. Our incarceration rate is about 6 times higher than Canada, about 7 times higher than England, about 10 times higher than Germany and France, and there's just no reason why we need to lock up 6 or 7 or 10 times as many people as our peer nations. So number one, cut the numbers. So many people are in prison in this country for petty, nonviolent offenses. They pose no risk to public safety, and they can be punished, they can be sanctioned. We can express our disapproval of their behavior in ways that don't involve incarceration. Secondly, we need to take corrections seriously. In every state that I know, the prison system is called the Department of Corrections, but I have rarely seen a prison system that really takes that name seriously and says, okay, our job is not to warehouse people. It's not to just lock them in a cell and forget about them. It's to make them better neighbors for when they're going to get out. And I think if we took that approach, our prisons would be better, and society would be safer because people would be coming out better rather than worse.